The championship battle is now down to 8 points as we are midway through the 2025 season. McLaren is clearly going to win this drivers unless something insane happens, and the battle amongst these two is actually extremely close. Both drivers have their strengths and weaknesses, but I want to go really in depth with Lando and Oscar. I actually made a video 2 years ago that you guys enjoyed, going over a lap where they're good, but I want to talk more than just a lap. I will go over the driving style, mentality, aggression, pace, and in general, which driver will do better on the 12 remaining tracks we do have. So there's plenty to break down. If you're new here, please go ahead and subscribe on the road to 100K. Means the world having your guys' support, and thank you all for stopping by. Let's go over Lando's driving style first. So I've actually made a driving style video on both drivers, Lando and Oscar, and they drive very differently even though they are teammates. For Lando, he likes a U-shaped cornering style and can be really called an attacking driving style. He's pretty good in high-speed corners, but when the car was balanced and had more of a front-ended style, you could really see how much pace he was gaining on Oscar in the low-speed stuff. Now, in this season, it's been different, but an update was brought to the front suspension and the rear was changed as well to give more feel for Lando, and as we've seen, in the last 5 qualifying, with the exception of Canada, he's been within the top 3. It's been a big step up in confidence for Lando as a driver, and the way that he takes that U-shaped around corners is working better than it was at the start of the season. Looking at his teammates, he drives completely opposite when looking at cornering style. For Piastri, it's more of an emphasis on that V-shaped cornering, and it's ideal for hairpins, and they do say tire management if you do have a very well-rounded, balanced car. He's also much more steady on the wheel. I've compared his driving style to a guy like Alain Prost, and there's way less minor corrections in Oscar's driving style in comparison to that of his teammate. The actual MCL39 was working better with his V-shaped style because it did have a bit of inherent understeer in the car, and you do lose a lot of pace if that oversteer snaps, and there's very little feel in the car if you try taking it in a V approach, but Oscar pretty much mastered that, braking late into corners. You can really see that in his lap in China earlier in the year, but as I said, it's gotten a lot even with a couple of updates. Lando has a better feel, and it has to be mentioned, Oscar has not put on the upgrades of the suspension because he believes it's not needed for the car. But if we're looking at head-to-head, looking at stats a bit more, in qualifying, it's been Piastri that has the edge over Lando. The real phenomenal pulls for me were Bahrain and Spain, while for Lando in particular, it's been Monaco and then obviously Austria. In Austria, Oscar didn't get a chance to do a second lap, but still, it's really been Lando's playing ground for a very long period of time. He loves that track, and it's very good for his type of driving style. Particularly in corner 4, he gains a lot of time on Oscar in those types of corners, while Bahrain is very V'd off, especially turn 1, and even that approach going into turn 11. He does a great job. So it's really funny how these driving styles, while they are very different, clash on different tracks and give the driver an advantage, especially in qualifying. Driving style matters so much in qualifying, much more than the race. Looking at race pace, it's been Lando on top. He does a much better job at conserving his tires, and that consistency from Lando lap to lap is better than that of Oscar. It's not a big difference, it's minor, but the same can be said for qualifying. Where Oscar excels at pulling the most out of the car when it's needed in one lap, Lando does that over a race pace with consistency. The key moments that we really need to talk about in 2025 so far has been Bahrain's dominance, really from Oscar himself, the bold pass he ended up making in Saudi to take the victory. Spain was also another one of those examples. And then if we look at Lando, Monaco was flawless, Austria, the wheel-to-wheel obviously racing, and we will take a look at the British GP's consistent drive from him to actually get him in that P1 position. Most of the races that Oscar has outright won, it's typically because Lando has made a mistake in qualifying. He has the clean air, keeps a very nice and steady lead, and Lando can never end up catching up to him, either due to traffic or just because he has that dirty air from behind. Now for Lando's case, he's had to have really pulled out everything out of the bag to beat Oscar, and Austria is a perfect example. For most of that race, Piastri was inhaling the fumes from that exhaust and still keeping up with Lando, and one minor mistake could have cost him that lead easily. But when it mattered, Lando put it in wheel to wheel and made it count, sometimes hitting him with the up and under or defending correctly, which is something we tend to not see very much in Lando's racecraft. This was a perfect example of how it should be done, but then in Miami, it cost him a lot of time being behind Max, and he ended up losing that race because of that reason. Oscar got ahead of Max much more efficiently than that of Lando, and it's these little details that really make the difference between the two drivers. So overall in race pace, it is still Lando on top, but because Oscar can actually beat him in qualifying and has the mentality, that sharp, cold, really killer mentality to make it work in those clutch moments, which we still have yet to see crack. I think the British GP was a little bit of a more emotional Oscar, but I can understand why he was more emotional than other races. And it wasn't because Lando ended up actually doing something to get him in that emotional state. It was a mistake that he made himself. Now from Lando's side, he's been really hard on himself from making those mistakes in qualifying. And now we finally see some actual improvement in qualifying and more consistent performances in that Q3. I do also think as the weather conditions change and there's more of a real cloudy or rainy environment, Lando has been on top. Examples being Australia and now recently the British GP, but that's not as great of an example because there were times that Oscar was very much ahead. It's very hard to compare that race, but Australia is a good example of them being extremely close. And yes, it was the first race of the season, but Lando pretty much ruled that race. Yes, Oscar did end up getting close, but the mistakes were what mattered in the end. So far, tire management has been on the side of Lando as well, which is huge, obviously, in these very heavy cars that rely so much on you being able to conserve the tires throughout a race stint. But even in qualifying, I think Oscar's done a better job of actually using the most out of the tire, especially in Sector 1 and 2. It's typically in Sector 3 where Lando can sometimes gain an edge on him. The rest of the calendar year still has a mix of a lot of corner variety. With the next track being in Spa, I actually think this is an Oscar-like track. But then Hungary and Zandvoort, I believe, are Lando-like tracks. Spa, you have that high-speed cornering, and that V-shape does very well in Turn 1, while the U-shape isn't as good in Spa. In Hungary, typically the U-shape line into Turn 1 works out better, and the same can be said for Zandvoort. Italy is definitely going to be a toss-up amongst the two drivers, and a lot of these tracks for the rest of the season are going to be a toss-up. Sometimes Oscar's going to be better, other times Lando's going to be better. But all in all, it's really neck and neck. The biggest difference for me in this season is if Lando can actually keep up with Oscar mentally, and we don't see any cracks from Oscar. If it starts getting to his head that this championship is very close and Lando ends up actually being the better out of the two and not cracking under the pressure, then it will be Lando who wins. I think as a pace difference, they're both pretty much even. It's all a mental battle at the end of the day. Regardless of the driving styles, it's who can make it count in the right moment. I think the beginning of the season, really up until this halfway point, has told us Oscar will be the championship winner. But in the last couple of GPs, it seems like Lando has turned it around. And winning 2 in a row was a feat he did not have before the British GP in Austria. So for me, it's really too close to tell who is faster. I do believe in the race, Lando. In qualifying, it is Oscar Piastri. If we actually look at racecraft, I do believe Oscar is the better of the two, but consistently performing from race to race, it is Lando who is better. I'm really intrigued to hear what you guys think in the comments. Who do you believe is better and who do you think will win the championship based off of what we talked about? Pace, driving style, mentality. It's all very important for who's going to end up being the guy number 1 in the drivers. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world. And peace.